about the fact that it is rich who in Ukraine is the direct position of us President Donald Trump, and before the sprat is known sanctions on the 10th month of his President Trump, about the escort of anti-Russian flagships to Russia on Naftovi and Rosneft, Lukoil on those two companies, disappearing close to Russia's exports. And I want to tell the truth about Trump's sanctions debut. Richly looked around. I respect that they are a full-fledged Russian-American president, and that I myself am still Putin constructive. Then sanctions will not be possible to sort out. How much do you respect the serious say Krok, still signaling the decision of Russia, Ukraine? Well, we are not giving up the whole situation yet. In principle, I have understood it. Still serious. You are not giving up yet. Trump, of the worst day of his presidency, really wants to get everything in the fire on the Ukrainian front. We arrived just as the days of our presidency, we had to get everything in the fire at the end. And in Propagnev to the president of Russia Putin, what little I would say, well, access to filthy minds. Also talk about prop and not on fire. Mark in place in his presidency. Trump at the ready talks about the recognition of the Russian status of Crimea and talks about the complete lifting of sanctions from Russia. And in principle, having respected Putin for 4 years, you promise to conquer Ukraine and nothing comes of it. Mayan and held the mines. Well, yak bachu, and not telephone mines, and not now oysters with Putin in Alaska. Trump failed to ponate Putin's datability around. And then, the American president, in principle, I write with the shlyak of the escalation of pogroms. The speaker still marks the tomahawk torture, is immersed in new sanctions, and, in principle, having extracted everything. Putin is on his phone. And the chain call of the Russian president, as far as I understand, Trump walls in Putin to the point of understanding. And it turned out I'm like Zazda. Putin, on the other hand, Tilky in order to disturb. The one who diluted not with the president, but I with the patient. And Kola is a sovereign secretary with a staff of Marco Ruby. You having decided to talk from the Minister of Transcordial Affairs of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, in order that from the oysters of Trump and Putin in Budapest, the not yet bright real ruined look of the word in Zagalish was revealed. It seems to me that access is not a rotten moment to be notified of the situation. Not yak real actions. Well, and in those situations when Trump, good marking about the fact that there was a fiasco in Anchorage, he has not yet succeeded in anyone and is on the tightrope that she is a fiasco, because in those situations, extremely powerful Trump does not overestimate anything. Yakti Shlyak is already a real day, then it's to show Putin that the rent is on the tilka on the words, but on the right. And richly, and now we can do it more effectively on the effectiveness of sanctions in the topic. And the fact is that Putin has disappeared with another Shlyak of daytime. Tilka times now punishing mines up to 2029 rock. Mind and Trump to their new day poke at Russia, and their new day poke at Ukraine. In the ruin of the status quo, it is not included in Putin's plans. And the fact that the status of the quorum is so shvidko, we are talking about the 10th month. Shvidko for Putin, there he also needed not 10 months, but 4 extremely laying him seriously to rest. Even Putin would not have been Sturbovany, Vinny, he would have come out and made statements Obrazny, disappointed, frustrated. I was in the Kremlin. I still Putin would be seriously seized, not up to Washington Kirill Dmitriev. I, obviously, will be able to turn around for help, and before the special representative of President Trump, Steve Witkoff. And I blame the American administration for the fact that it is not the Gershi themselves who are fighting for their hands. And we truly Dmitriev's claim, for centuries on both at gas stations, there will still be such a situation, and you know perfectly well. And a serious point about the need to say. So in that regard, you and I do not hand over perfectly, of course, and the whole situation for Putin is on discounts. But I have not yet threatened, then not the reception, because without knowing what the situation will look like the most. We know so, Kirill Dmitriev, Putin's trusted special outside the head of the Direct Investment Fund, and such a Svaznik Svitkov. And about relaying such, you know, 3 unrealistic business projects. I've strained the tunnel, a well-known bag, yes, the Bering Bio. And our colleague Taras is referring to Pan Dmitriev's comment, and why we can suppress it here. So, and with Taras writing, Widow Commentar on arrival in the USA with a mission to the lag, here is a video with the White House. Of a bright handicap of diplomacy. The next time Dmitriev will sleep with propagandists, they knocked down a huge toilet in the subway. Similar all the time Putin is still up to the peak of Trump, and the face on the table will be serious. Still. Style. And the central bank loans and draw. I also mark the good. The NATO summit in Madrid 1990 C. and Rick. You make a Persia decision about the expansion of NATO. Poland, the Czech Republic and Ukraine become a full member of NATO. Ukraine on the topic of the summit charter of the Atlantic Alliance. It is not appropriate, but she will not swim in, and not on the decision of the Atlantic Alliance. And not on the decision of Ukraine of Central Europe. A delegation together with Deputy Prime Minister Sarov is being sent from Moscow to the upcoming NATO summit. And I remember, we also took a Coke with Pan Sarov. So that we could grind through his thoughts by giving a press conference, not in the NATO press center. They have absolutely calmly a simple and briefing, of course. Journalists shook the honor, and there was very little thought about Moscow. After giving his interview to phone booths. Here I remember the Deputy Prime Minister of Russia's phone booth, then this rank is exactly what does not want to go into the office. On the style and in the PV, it's not that not all of them will be in the future anyway. So I think this is a demonstrative gesture, and I just need to read it, and so the signals are transmitted. You all have one argument and dilute, and you threw us out on and will turn around. After all, it's Patsy. Well, to Vitaly, there's a sprat even before those sanctions. Well, there will be no sanctions, we know in a month and an hour. Trump will come up with a girlfriend Trump on European sanctions against the Shadow Fleet, without sharing the fate of the U. Russia's gold and foreign exchange reserves frozen in the West are confiscated by the process of Razlogi. Well, and a third of treason in the position, even before the knocking of Ukraine's reset. We also know that he is to all contractors of Rosneft and Lukoil, and in the term up to 20 bags are torn up on the latter. And us sanctions, there will be serious discounts for that. We do not know that Putin at that time did not drive Trump to a duel on the edge. Well, I praise Vitaly still like this, and will go on the decal, and we can still have a few visits. I repeat once again, in order for Trump to change his policy, Putin is on the way. Linear history on Trebuchet in linear history. Trump needs Putin to get into the fire on the Russian-Ukrainian front. It was his adoration from the fierce 2025 rock. Declare phone times with Putin. There were no real lines. This type. So maybe it's not crazy to fire, and you can talk it over, and you are such Alaskans. Shvidko reach, and include disappearing into the fire. Well, not, and not a friend, and not the third. And Trump turned to the position, and the position of the oysters are there, and declares. In order for Trump to have a real grip on everything, Putin needs to be on, and not just there for Trump, and in what? Vitaly, but all the drive is torture, it's rich who respects Zara's teeth frozen. And it is possible on the bark of the Kremlin, there to see in this their own army that, well, it is known that the replacement for territorial parcels of their positions was attacked by such a rank. Trump is the same, saying that it's Putin gone, I seem to be English territorial speeches and dates are caused to him. But what else is in Putin's he for such an absolutely principled and uncompromising game in the hall? I think that the Chinese comrades here, I do not allow everything. I do not know what we can miss. We can't be empty, having absolutely seen Putin's logic. It is not necessary that someone did not allow it. In the People's Republic of China, I will sail to Russia on such instruments, which they will also not allow. So it is known that China's economical entry into Russia as a partner in the struggle for Putin, who respects to continue the blame for the eviction early, the chip will be able to and the Ukrainian rear on a prominent army. It's too early for the entire Ukrainian infrastructure, you're still on the Ukrainian energy sector. Here we are diluting the Russian Shah flies up to systematically work on pretending the territory of Ukraine is not attached. And there is absolutely no need to interrupt Putin. He really has soldiers, pennies, missiles, drones, and the piece of a non-intensive approach for it. So it's not the alleged importance of Peter Chi to Putin's hand to fix. I'm still Putin Tilke on Pripy not on fire. An intense lawsuit against Ukraine by Trump's side, so that it takes in the fire of the president. From the state received in the Russian Federation. Approximately so, Yak Trump T-shower on Tanu on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, that I am Hamas. His sponsors on him at Netanyahu, without trying interest to Israel, what was in the Israel Defense Forces. Can lie for an hour in Gaza positions militants. Hamas Mendatni and absolutely Hamas can be seen on him fighting political the potential for further attacks on Israel. 1,000 on Netanyahu, and Netanyahu embarrassed to think about the heirs of such a decision in the fire in the Gaza Strip. And at a time, we state a new guilt at the end, and the moment after of course. And the sealing of the wound layers. And it's true that Trump can get such a wound sealing with a plaster in Ukraine. I don't respect the problems for Ukraine yet, because I respect the guilt for Ukraine for a long time. Throw it into a large-scale demographic catastrophe. I'm going to talk at once about infrastructure, about electrics, about economical roses. So everything can be seen. It is absolutely possible to see that Ukraine will become frequent in the European Union. I will be investing again. But the objects are economical. And you can't turn people around. I'm still Ukraine will become a power for 10 million people. It will already become a power for 40 million. And in principle, we are the head of Putin, I am the head of Russia, and the leader of the Russian people. I am demographically above the Ukrainians. Not just skin Russians will come to these territories, respecting the territories of Russia and Ukraine, but demographically over everything. And those who are Ukrainian counselors. And people with ethnographic maps with a participant retinue so that it ended in handheld stories. They seem to be still his prices I would not. Here you are erring in from Israel, you know perfectly well that we Jews meet with our own sussids. And history is also often turned off in archaeological museums. People may not have their own culture and their own civilization in ancient times, and watches were respected. So they will still be 3 times located in their native territories. Empires have erased their lands, so that in them, the memory in museums has ended from Tilka. And this was the decision of the Roman emperors. Of the Jews, it was enough. In Chen, just Jews revealed the strongest, for the self-sanctioned incompetent Rome. And I was able to build my imperious civilization on the ruins of the Roman Empire. And the sprats from the peoples were erased by Rome, Persia, Isham, and such cruel and faggot empires of that hour. And Nicola's lesson should not be forgotten. And an important tool of the empire is erasing the peoples on the territory of their people's residence on such is not yet a traitor. In general, the people showed off. Putin is actively engaged in this. The prices of Persh with a sample of Russia to win demographic wine from Ukrainians. So it was a nursery near the Ukrainian place was inhabited by Russian. So it was you mark up, the situation was already good, tied up from the factual impoverished Ukrainian national elite. And then there was the Holodomor and the dark places again at the gathering. And the beer hall of our Ukraine was populated by neighboring Russian regions. That the once famous civilizational and national image of Ukraine will pretend to be and just to continue Russia. I already find about the historical embarrassment over the Ukrainian. Their history was rewritten, and so that it looked like the history of someone else's prominent people. And for the coming stage of my demographic guilt, I am VD Putin. The Russian people against the Ukrainian people. And the fewer Ukrainians there are on earth, the will know, remind me, the piles will be respected by Russians. What's wrong with the Poles? With Poles of speech. With the Crimean Tatars, they bought their power, brought their mediocre civilization, floors, books and machetes, there were people. Kicked them out. 90 Crimean Tatars lived on the territory of the Crimean state, and the discount ended at the time of Stalin's praises. About the deportation of the Crimean Tatars of the rid lands. Even a long time ago, there were even fewer percentages in the land of power with the Russian ones. And in the eyes of the subsidies to the Crimea, firm the highly developed Crimean Tatar state, becoming a Brudnaya Russian dacha. Why does he not want to forget from Ukraine? He wants to create a successful European Ukraine, and a Brudnaya mediocre Russian dacha. Black Ukrainian land to try and grow and cannot grow in Russia. That's all their non-logic of guilt. Try and eat licorice tomatoes according to their sonus. And I don't want to, the Azerbaijanis will soon stop this tomato. We have been using the internet in the hall for an hour. The whole story is about the fact that the wine in Ukraine, Ikola wine ends, and about the import. The labor force there is about, I do not know, 2 million Pakistanis will go for yaki $100 a month. Becomes a filthy salary. It is known about Europeans, Odnodumtsov, one ver of white people about brown people, Muslims. And I do not know that it is possible to do so. Well, I don't think it's in Russian, Katie. I think that Fears does not want to elect a Slavic, Snow-Slavic Orthodox people. And the mind will live with millions of people on symbols before and Lacia Ukrainka, Shevchenko, Frank, and Yurvira. Well, I think that the Russians tesh on the symbol, and before Shevchenko, and before Frank, and before the Orthodox Ukrainian Church, are going to replace their greedy sect of Cyril. And the truth is that in order for migrants to go to Ukraine, she is my statue economically priva and carefree Ukraine. According to another Putin's Russia, we will not beat such a Ukraine. So I think that the lion is driven by migrants and replaced by absolutely obvious. And Ukraine will also become frequent in the European Union. It will be like the whole of Europe. I have an ethnic warehouse in my eyes. You mark, we also drove to Warsaw, to Krakow, and it seemed, oh, Poland. Looking for all the Minakshi below the neighboring European Ukraine. Yak wonderfully here I am on the site of the 20th story. The Poles themselves. But that's it, we have never visited such Poland. I will punish about millions of Ukrainians overgrown, and drove to Poland, obviously, and there it will be heard. And for the rich, it will already be similar to officially accepted Polish. I would say accepted from the point of view of our image of pre-war Poland. And sardines from the global piven, living in Poland, and all bilsh and bilsh. This is just a nobody civilization. Do not allegedly bearded with migration in demographic minds find Europe, do not allow protest. And the most ethnographic snake on the European continent. Food is what we can really do. The ranks of such exiled sovereign organisms, I move to the European Ukraine from the Ukraine of the global pub, are frequent in our civilization. Tikka is our culture and our values and our tradition, for which the exiled Ukrainian state is needed. That he doesn't want the migrant not to dilute the Russian one, drink it themselves. Drink, dilute someone else's in these Ukrainian places, and migrants will dilute the Ukrainian move. Why do African students pass through China to Ukraine, dilutes the Ukrainian move. And millions of Ukrainians are in the darkness of their fathers. I'm not in my dad yet. You will just have Insha, Russia, a migrant here, and you will be marginals, and the authorities of Ukraine who have won the blame. That's it. Well, as for expression, yes, that is, the external demonstration of Vera, I am the whole concept of French lie, yes. Secularity to the fact that, well, we are still bashing France is struggling with that, with the process. And even before that, all the processes are not in the fog, and they are not swirling. She's in Ukraine will pomatet to Vitaly, it has started, and it was Kovida, and the wine. And I was Natrapel in Kiev in taxis, taxi drivers take to the top something in the water of Uganda with Bangladesh. And here are such four such intervals. Richly from Central Asia, Tesh passages, and Tajikistan. So, those people also traveled their Ukrainians on Vidminu the poison of the Russians, did not accept them their people of a different kind. And the litter is still from Central Asia, against the road to Russia. Take the Russians and other varieties. There is also Russian, completely soaked with racism. Even to the point that he respects the authorities from Buryasha, then you are the Ukrainians of the Caucasus, the beer enters the warehouse. The beer enters the warehouse of the Russian Federation. I'm already dead, and I'm going to punish the Caucasus. Ches is not a vaga, absolutely such a Russian Vera, in the burden of a white man. People are extremely close to the Russians, and in their Ukraine, I am therefore the productions of the peoples. Still Tilka does not find there and belittling on the Chuvity. I'm handing you over, having dealt with what they are finding out, and it became a discovery for me. A Jew in Ukraine, a Jew in Russia, with all the difference about the fact that during the radio hours in Ukraine, strong anti-Semitism is richly the strongest not in Russia. And I'm for Baki, that Jews are hard here, and there could be conflicts with a Ukrainian, and moreover there could not be scandals. If there were partner bags in me, no one would have visited a friend nearby, of course. The people at Beulah are anti-Semitic. They were able to put up to Jews for freedom. And so they come to Moscow. And I'm Bachu Paralyakani Moscow Jews. I'm still the Russians to straighten their shoulders. Get them involved. And I'm just saying that it's just such a normal model of duels in Russia. Elder brother, we are all belittling here, we are all on shifts here, and the Jews are on the national gentleman's Gershi. And there is darkness in Ukraine, and its Ukrainian looks like it will have a chance of being a grade. Yes, such as Russians and the like, and Ukrainian organizations in Moscow are not so rich. Ukrainians have dozens, hundreds, thousands severe in Moscow seized a frequent Ukrainian entourage and numerals posters there. And respected even lower Russians will counselors them for their own, and now remember, greedy Russians Nikola on Voz have Ukrainians for their own. And you are helping us to give the SB to the Russians. The crest is loved. I'm saying that it's not the appeal that is turned off for the average Russian. So, in order for Ukrainians to rest the call of Nisht, as it is clear that it is not up to the Jews, to the prefix in the Caucasian peoples, but the appeal of the Tesh exuding. Will not be in the varieties of slavery on the best friend. Well, yes, what am I talking about Ukrainian anti-Semitism? Such a phenomenon is still being spread now in the hall of bat hands in the floor. Russians, you are familiar with Ukrainian politics, and I am up to the 16th lesson. For the bureau in Ukraine of candidates to blame, up to the 14th lesson. And I hope the anti-Semitic slogans were extinguished. They needed Ukraine to look like an anti-Semitic power. Export to Zahid. And there you have simple civilizational such a process. I was just on the day of the referendum, the chest for 1,990 euro was laid in the Kiev Sanagos on the hem. And you, of course, are perfectly well aware of who the mortgage is. He was enough for the Ukrainian referendum to be all poured into his son. People looked in. There was still a whole head on the day for Ukrainians to vote for independence. And then the synagogue in Kiev was also fucked up, firm which it was not enough to take out the light media spalti on the Persh. Ukraine has voted for fallowness. There is a synagogue in Kiev. That's fine. But I was just diluting it with you. The Russians bombed a synagogue in Kherson. You know, right? Well, the rocket snored into the ford of the Asman process on. This is true, but on. And the Kherson slave, who survived all to the fact that he was on the sprats of the ramparts there for the ceremony. Otherwise everyone would have looked in and woken up. Here is an absolutely concrete illustration of who is an anti-Semite here. Yaka power is anti-Semitic, Russian in fact, their foundations are not of course. And the power for those still anti-Semites, racists, and Putin said in his applications in the Kremlin that there cannot be such a situation in international mutual relations. Is one power praising the decision? That is, all the Russian evils here are missiles, a drone. In the childhood of children from a child's garden. Yaka is such an unbearable Russian piddly, said this Sioux English into being in detectives, but into being Russian children into being. And from everything it says about the fact that you can be cracked on a sovereign power. And what about Ukraine? Is it possible to add? This is for such cognitive dissonance on the Chervin about the process. I am the theme of Israel for us and for our I myself was tested on the cinema from the program. Through the fact that I am so I am in Israel. And I just want a constitution also on my mind, on my forehead, that she came from the Miracle Islands to Corsica, Elba. That Sardinia in Italy, well, you just didn't go to the leather beach of the Palestinian propors in Ukraine. I am a respectful Ukraine, I am talking about the Israeli Ukraine in the light of the Vicom of Israel itself. And then there's more. Because everything is much better. All the Hamas propaganda has really come to such, I would say, good ground in Europe. And yes, the legalization of anti-Semitism in Europe helped, I would say. The fact that you are all these people, I told us about the children of Gaza, and went out. And I don't go out on PPR about the children of Kharkiv. They don't care about the children of Kharkiv, they don't care about Israeli children, I'm in the sale of Hamas. It was buried with his own hands, and sweeps and close. The bodies of the sprats turned to Israel and were in the life of Hamas. Pete searches NATO of those people happen to be children. And those people, Yakim absolutely Baidu the same as for the children of Ukraine, and for the children of Israel. You bend the civil population of Gaza, and actually pretend to be on the oil and aggression of Hamas. In order to realize classic European anti-Semitism. In order to remove the visibility for the greatest misfortune of European peoples in the history of the continent. 4. Well, yes, and folded my mission in the 23 African, Ukraine, and I in a species, never made test. And we too and reside over Ukraine, even Zach just behind the ear Israel with genocide against the poor Palestinian children. From manual testing out, and all steam up to Kenny, to Madagascar still flail standards. They managed to get to Vesta. Something else the Jews turned to their historical fatherland. They were kicked out through speech, and who kicked them out? He kicked me out as a European. Europe kicked out their retinue. And she was persecuted in Europe itself. So that's what the Jews are a colonist. He also wants from Otozhny, and the Jews forever turned to the house and shot down the mind will be punished. The colonizers and in Africa, Latin America, the Yaks actually drove the indigenous peoples into reservations. Beer America. Out and the Jews, the Yaks turned to the house scrolls and needles, the people themselves drove Africa and America. And then not with myself. And terrorist organizations, and an anti-Semite in a European. Such myths are also used to justify powerful evil. We know about all these people. Well, okay, let's finish this topic about the European Union and the coalition. A coalition of adoring, I do not know how the Ukrainians shift. Yes. That is, it's already scared for us everything has passed. They knew after all, and what I feel is your solidarity with the fact that we are already guessing like this after the 48th lesson. Not me and not Vitaly, not the mayor at the end of Donald Trump. And yet I respect rich experts overgrown in social networks. And for Russia, Putin has not yet become numb between Hamas and Israel. Well, I don't believe, not a friend, I respect that there will really be problems for Russia. That Russia is at a close gathering for the blame in order to involve this vag of holy spivts and powerful evil in Ukraine. I don't think that will happen. So, well? Okay, yes, Anna and Vitalia. Well, let's wrap up our scope with the European context. I have already made up my mind about frozen Russian assets, problems with it being difficult through the position again. Deposits for a decision about the transfer of frozen Russian in Ukraine in the U to vocational schools before. So that in Kiev reparative poses in Ukraine, I pay for the rahunush of the Russian Federation in Europe. And the reparations itself. In Kiel, the idea of laying out the sum, even before the appearance of international law, but it is known that Belgium sent its position once. 140 million is being saved. You have almost billions of Russian euro-denominated assets. The Belgian Vlada Zafang is a member of the Union of Visibility, and the idea has not found wide in European Ukraine. On discounts in Vitaly, after all, the torture is an hour to the fact that we are pumping even before the justice of the torture. The lead professors of Harvard University already have warehouses of sweets about the profitability of these visits. And how much respect do you still have in it all? I think that Russia has pulled up international law and is protesting to Ukraine, a drop on international law, which is in fact completely issuing law procedures, including international financial law, with brigades. So I'm with hybrid solutions anyway to praise, so that Russia's assets are not turned, their aviates on the beard of Ukraine, would be visible from Russia outside of Ukraine. And the mind does not roll over all those who are pennies in European banks, including in that it is necessary to create such a mind for these. Russia would be amused to this problem for the financial system of Europe, and why is it necessary to take Russia beyond the souls of international law? And you can work tiki mind for Moroccan. Well, you're just overgrown, so there are such Latin terms that are absolutely beyond the law, then Russia does not offer this law. And not foreseeing off, and so Russia is a power organized by a malicious grouping, pretending to be a power to forgive its money. Well, what about the corruption roars here? I'm what we're talking about. I will praise the Russian groves in Ukraine about the readings on European control, to the fact that I haven't seen enough yet. I'm as if the reader will say 4 pennies, there will really be accumulation both on and otherwise, we have a share of the Moldovan billion. So. Vitaly, we have literally 3 praises. I'm still with the light-eyed, so much torture turned to Trump, you know, and we are yaking with you. That side again, Trump is not ours, yes. Not that it's put on the peak of Ukraine, otherwise an absolute barbarian, even before the White House, is run on our power. It's not his turn, and the fixerum, ballrooms on the throes of their opponents, it was not successful to get a barrier. And John Polton Zarata, and so on. Scores in the hall means we Putney Ukraine to the fact that Ukraine is struggling proti autoritario. Struggling to liberal democratic way of life in the Ukraine, and she appellul to such a policy. On the symbols, I'm a liberal democracy, it is here. Ukraine has not had a supposedly democratic liberal way of life for a long time in May. You've been talking about these hours of conspiracies for a long time on Maya. 2000. 2019th generation Ukrainian, I clearly showed some Vlad Inano and about important of Ukraine. And I think it will be the same in Maybutna, the sky of illusions. In fact, the elimination of the rat from identity conflicts in Ukraine is the alignment of all minds. In order for Ukraine to be more similar to Viktor Orban's cleaning service, lower to Ukraine Manu. The cradle of the democratically liberal will show order, so otherwise there would be a massacre of the party. Well, we do so often. Vitaly, fences of gay parades, LBT. And 4 Metrica. No, I'll tell you. I think that I will already be tormenting, that I am Ukrainian in my own, to such growls. I think that the problem there is with Key, and all the growls, it can also be in Ukraine, Europe, a turn in the whole situation. We are already Bakim forces are going to Vlada in Europe. So I do not put the process in the hall and think, because I would not have had enough in Ukraine. To think that they are defending a democratically liberal Ukraine there. I think that Ukrainians are defending Ukraine, and I think there will be the whole of Ukraine we will cut out, and that she is fighting for a political map retinue, and the ethnographic retinue of the Ukrainian people is fighting. You are also the Ukrainian people in the big menage, the democratic menage of the liberal power, will choose him. Ukrainian elections to Russian. The fact that the whole idea that this is the birth of democracy and authoritarianism is overestimated by the soul of the test. And I also think Russia will be democratic and liberal, so we don't need Ukraine. So it is necessary to think I was cancer in the 90s, and richly who spoke. Let's go to Russia at once, Yeltsin, the Democrats are liberals, and we have communists ruling here. No, we need Ukraine. On Yakuyu torture to Ukraine. And guilt. People defend democracy or barrelism, but the power and their right to choose the power of the bank. Vitaly, and then I cut between Ukraine, a small authoritarian Ukraine, and Russia is yours. Ukraine. She came out. Ukraine is fighting its own civilization, its own culture, and its own views on the sweet. And Russia can be like that itself. I will take out the Russians. Of course. I will still be in front of a democratic Russia, not a democratic Ukraine. Ukraine is still the choice of the Ukrainian people. Eamon de Valera's Ireland was not as democratic in Winston Churchill's Great Britain. And there was Ireland, and all of Ireland was not at war with Hitler. And there was Ireland, and that was in Britain. Not democracy liberalism, but the preservation of national power. And the right of people in the state to embroider, and like Nabu. Absolutely no detours, there are political views of Donald Trump. It is not necessary that Donald Trump and the United States help the Ukrainians to honor their power. About the confrontation with Russia. You are not in the fact that Ukraine have come close to tautology on the pre-authoritarian model of government, and the personalist model of government in Moscow, and they will be richly less than any prominent ones, then they will simply become natural allies. The fact that I am a self-respecting authoritarian Russia does not go anywhere according to the very factors of the Ukrainian people. Not my values will be from democracy, whose authoritarianism. My meaning is that Ukraine will be a leader, and it is a power for Ukrainians. And for Russians in authoritarian Ukraine. Absolutely you are on Tilky once again Russia will become democratic. And you, knowing the right of Ukrainians to the foundation. That is, here you can go through a serious audition for all those who want to bericht to Ukraine. The Russian gingerbread is richly cut for the Ukrainian people below the Russian bati. Yes. There is an unpopular idea of liberal democracy on the label. I also don't seem to know that the process is literally filled in on everyone. I am an absolute liberal democracy. And in order to save liberal democracy, it is necessary to save, of course. I don't want you to have a kettle, but you can't have tea. Tom needs a kettle for the cob with a razor, and then tea is poured into it. And trends. I think that we just went out on a worm trend everywhere, and I will talk about the process, and I'm already leaving Israel in a few days. And flying to Romania to Ukraine. And we have about expert Ukraine, I don't understand that there is a tesh, trends I'm obviously for us as well. Russia, Ukraine and Romania have not noble gases. And there was a trend in Ukrainian politics. It was scary about discounts, but they were watering to Russia. And I had a lot of need. In the brightness of the gate of the rich Ukrainian politicians were removed and Romania. Not to tell the truth about what Vitaly, thank you for all Rozmoa. Generous and for an hour nama buff, pan Vitaly.